same uniform as that worn by Napoleon during his coronation. A throne more than 3 meters high. A ceremony that cost an estimated $20 million at the time. It is 40 years ago that Jean-Bedel Bokassa was crowned Emperor of Central Africa. Bokassa took power 11 years earlier, in 1996, by overthrowing the first president of the Central African Republic. In 1972, he proclaimed himself president for life, then marshal and finally emperor. His huge coronation attracting 500 journalists from all over the planet.
Nous, Bokassa Ier, jurons et promettons solennellement devant le peuple, devant l'humanité tout entière et devant l'histoire de tout mettre en œuvre pour veiller scrupuleusement à la saine application de la Constitution de l'Empire centrafricain.
Bokassa remained in absolute power for another 2 years, supported in particular by the man he called his dear relative, the French president, Valéry Giscard. Relations, though, strained, and in the end, in 1979, French troops landed in the capital Bangui to overthrow the emperor. Bokassa got his own back, though, a while later, disclosing he'd offered diamonds to Giscard d'Estaing when he was finance minister. The scandal helping to ensure the French president's defeat in the elections of 1981. After almost 10 years of exile, Bokassa returned home in 1986. He was tried for treason, murder and embezzlement. Charges of cannibalism were, though, dropped. Sentenced to death, he spent a total of 7 years in prison before being released in 1993 under an amnesty. He died of a heart attack 3 years later. As Bokassa fell, the country was already in decline. The political class mired in corruption, playing ethnic groups off against each other. That and war has made the country one of the poorest in the world. But still, the son of the former emperor himself has managed to embark on a political career of his own. Patrick Fandio and Edouard Dropsy revisit Bokassa's empire for France 24.
Tropical mist rises on the banks of the Ubangi, the river that spans more than 2,000 kilometers and crosses through the heart of the Central African Republic. A republic that was once an empire, albeit fleetingly between December 1977 and September 1979. At the edge of the river, there are a few buildings dating from this imperial era, like this former luxury hotel. As a city, Bangui is still nicknamed La Coquette, the stylish capital. A vestige of the past when the country was under the influence of self-proclaimed Emperor Jean-Bedel Bokassa, a man who wanted to be more than a king and whose portraits are still sold in the streets of Bangui today, like relics of a tormented history between a tyrant and his people.
You see, there were different kinds of pictures when he was still young and still in the French army. You see how he dresses. Here he's wearing a jacket.
Carefully preserved by this bookseller, period documents such as this unique copy of Bangui Match, inspired by the French weekly Paris Match, which became an imperial gazette to the glory of Bokassa.
You know, it's something that was created back in 1974, created by General Jean-Bedel Bokassa. Inside you have a bit of everything. You have some history of the Central African Republic, you have the old companies, you have how his party worked. That was his marshal ceremony, when he was given the rank of marshal.
Stéphane has a certain feeling of nostalgia, that of the Bokassa era that he considers to be the golden age of the Central African Republic.
Bokassa was a great man. I like him a lot. His philosophy of working, he inspires me with all he's done. When he was in power, Bangui was the coquette, the city of Paris. So after Bokassa, I think there was not much left. That's why I love his story and his achievements, because he is someone who works. So I too am a hard worker. So I like someone who works. That's why I really like Bokassa.
Nostalgia for Bokassa in a country living off international assistance and the relative protection of United Nations peacekeepers. A country dripping in the blood of communal massacres termed a pre-genocidal situation by the UN. A republic now in the hands of armed groups that control 3/4 of the country and where the Bokassa Empire is all but a distant memory. A distant memory for those who witnessed Bokassa's coronation, like Gabi Modomole, back on this main avenue around the stadium in which the coronation took place at the time.
All Bangui flocked here to gather on both sides of this avenue to witness the so-called historical event. For us children at the time, it was truly an unforgettable moment. It was really memorable.
A coronation in the grandiose arena called the Omnisport of Bangui back in 1977. A venue destroyed after the fall of Bokassa and since transformed into a new sporting arena.
Do not forget that it was called at the time the Palace of the Coronation. So it was the most visible symbol of the coronation of the emperor. So here is the enclosure of the Palace of the Coronation. The official stand was on this side. And where you now see stands was the crowd. The audience was there. The human hedge, formed by young girls, went from there, from the outside until here, to the official platform. And many officials declined the invitation of the emperor, since the coronation had not been recognized by everyone, especially internationally. But at a national level, there was a general mobilization. The political class, too, had no choice but to be there.
5,000 guests attended the elaborate ceremony where wardrobe, embroidery and silverware were provided by the finest French luxury and craft houses. A luxurious occasion modelled on the coronation of Napoleon. In the tropical heat, Bokassa sat on a gilded throne 3 meters high, wearing a heavy velvet coat edged with ermine, a crown on his head set with thousands of diamonds and emeralds, and carrying a gold scepter weighing around 5 kilos. A quarter of the state budget was spent on the extravaganza. The emperor then installed his court in Barengo, about 75 kilometers from Bangui. His son takes us along the once imperial road to what remains of the palace of Bokassa I. Without endorsing his father's reign of terror, he defends the family name.
It's true that he ran the country with an iron fist. Some would say without velvet gloves. I don't know if doing it as it was done then would be a solution for us now, but I think that we still need firmness to hold the country together. We, the Central African people, we need firmness.
A few meters ahead of us lies the entrance to what remains of the imperial court of the Central African Republic. A statue of Bokassa still stands in the middle of the ruins.
Okay.
Ironically, the name Bokassa is again associated with power in the Central African Republic, because his son, Jean-Serge Bokassa, is Minister of Territorial Administration in the current government, the only one of the former emperor's 40 or so heirs to be involved in politics. Jean-Serge was 5 years old at the time of his father's coronation and often stayed here at the palace.
Back then, it was full of life. There was so much going on. That's the imperial court of Barengo.
The Palace of Barengo, one of the emperor's residences, full of mysteries and legends.
Here there used to be underground passages with 3 entrances of the same kind. I used to wander around here. Yeah, there are a lot of myths about these passages. Some say there were treasures inside. And here it used to be the residence of the Empress. The residence of the Empress, with my brother's rooms in the hall downstairs. The safe was just at the entrance to the courtyard. There used to be a small house next door. This is where all Barengo's accounting was done. It was run from there. There were many production units here, factories a little further on, coffee factories, a rice factory, a cinema, a recording house, and then a little further on you had a heliport and an airport.
This was an abandoned palace long dreaded by opponents of Bokassa. A site famous for the torture and the crimes committed here by the sinister Praetorian Guard of the emperor who lived here under high security.
Over there we have the last watchtowers. You see, it's a pile of scrap covered with leaves now. The guards used to take turns up there.
Between 2013 and 2014, the palace of the fallen tyrant served as a refuge for Seleka fighters, the rebel coalition that seized power before being driven out, triggering the current cycle of religious and communal massacres. From the view of this palace, the Bokassa reign appears to have been the last period of stability before the country was plunged into chaos.
Whatever the criticisms that have been made against him, those who came after have not necessarily lived up to the expectations of the people. We almost want to say, shouldn't his rule have carried on? Is there now not someone in Central Africa who can straighten the situation out?
The country's decline began at the fall of the emperor. His regime of terror has had a long aftermath, maintaining the Central African Republic in a deadlock by silencing all opposition. Bokassa's opponents continue to meet nearly 40 years after the collapse of his empire. They don't have any regrets about fighting his dictatorship, but harbour bitterness at having to witness the deterioration of their country. The fall of the despot having awakened old demons.
One realizes that after Bokassa, tribalism came back, nepotism came back, regionalism came back, and tribal wars came back. We don't recognize ourselves anymore, and that's what I regret. At the time of Bokassa, it was different. But we've gone back 20, 30 years. We didn't know that in our youth. That's what's regrettable. And that's where I say we've gone back many years.
We need an enlightened despot to solve the situation. An enlightened despot, that is to say, someone who is a strong man, a strong-willed man who can put things back in order. We are only a virtual republic. It takes a tough man, not a dictator. I said enlightened despot. It's not a dictator we need.
A virtual republic and a bankrupt state, which, outside the capital Bangui, has lost almost all authority over the rest of the country. Bambari here is a symbol of the chaos playing itself out in the Central African Republic. There have been several massacres in this area, which is surrounded by armed groups. It's barely protected by the United Nations mission that is tasked with watching over thousands of displaced residents trapped here. Like Joseph, he's in charge of this makeshift camp. People here wait for hypothetical action by a state that seemingly abandoned its citizens.
We're asking the state to really push the armed groups away from the city. They continue to loot and all that. We don't want to go home. Our houses are destroyed. We're unable to return to our neighborhoods. So we need new houses. We need the state to give us support before we go back to our neighborhoods.
Nearly a quarter of the 4.5 million people of the Central African Republic have been displaced. A record number after 40 years of coups d'etats and rebellions that followed the end of the Bokassa regime. The self-proclaimed ruler was given a death sentence, which was later commuted to life in solitary confinement, and eventually he was freed. But the man who dreamed of an empire has not lived to experience the nightmare many Central Africans find themselves in today.
Patrick Fandio and Edouard Dropsy revisiting Bokassa's empire for France 24. Well, that's all from this week's edition. Don't forget, of course, you can catch it again on our website at france24.com. There's more news coming up very shortly. Do stay with us if you can.